Hello and happy Witch Business Day. We have some serious witch business to take care of today, Eric Goldman, because a lot of stuff happened on WandaVision. For many of you last night at midnight, for me this morning, I think it's 6:30 a.m. I'm Roth Cornet. This is Eric Goldman, as mentioned, and we are going to talk full spoilers about WandaVision in 5, 4, 3, 2, graphics. Sound effects. Hello, Eric. So the blending of these two shows, the show within the show, has become even more acute in the last couple of weeks, including this week. So obviously there's the shows that are happening within the world of Wanda, where she just keeps on skipping through all of her favorite series throughout time, which, I'd love to have a conversation with Wanda Maximoff about it critically, about television through the ages. And I'm not kidding. Like if Disney can arrange for us to get Elizabeth Olsen in character
yes.
talking about the shows that she likes, that would be delightful. But then obviously the MCU show, which has a very distinctly MCU tone to it, is eking further and further in. So let's talk about that. Are you happy with the direction that it is going? Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we kind of knew, even from the press they did, like that, by the final few episodes, it was going to be less of the sitcom trappings. Plus, they made this decision here to jump ahead. They kind of skipped all of the 90s.
They skipped the 90s. Heck, man.
I was wrong. I thought they were going to do kind of a Roseanne-ish episode because I saw one of her outfits from the 80s episodes, and I realized thought it was something else. But I also realized like sitcoms were kind of the same in the 90s. They could have done something like Rosanna Married with Children, a little like yeah.
Disagree. And you are a great television critic, as we know. But the sitcoms, the 90s was okay. Let me give you a very quick analogy as a horror fan, and y'all don't be mad at me. We're getting back to WandaVision very shortly. The perfect horror trilogy, as I have stated many, many times in the past, is Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and then Scream, because it shows you the evolution of the genre. What we have done, ladies and gentlemen, the mistake in judgment that we have made, ladies and gentlemen, by skipping the 90s, is skipping the era in which the sitcom turned itself in on itself with Roseanne and with Married with Children, where it pointed out the disconnect from reality that sitcoms were immersed in. Having said that and talking myself right back into a circle, is that a show that's commenting about sitcom tropes within the Marvel universe, commenting about sitcom tropes within the television universe might get very confusing. So yes, they have done the right thing by skipping to Malcolm in the Middle.
Yeah, and I think the other reason they did it at this point was because Malcolm marked the huge shift into single camera comedies, which had existed previous, but Malcolm really began it becoming the norm going forward into Scrubs, into The Office, and into where we are today. And so I think that's another reason they did it, because as they're blending the realities, it's like suddenly the comedy, yes, Malcolm was a very heightened show, and they talked to the camera and they had some of the kind of fast camera moves, but at the end of the day, it still was shot much more like a movie. So now you can visually have things get closer and closer to each other, which I think is very purposeful, knowing that they're only a few episodes from the end. They want it to look, they already made the decision to get rid of like the framing wasn't really 80s sitcom framing anymore. So I think that they want it to more and more look the same heading towards the ending, as it's going to kind of all really come together.
There's also the fourth wall breaking that went on, and I just want to pause for a moment and say how impressed I am that you apparently followed my train of thought enough to just be like, yeah, that's accurate. we're not going to unpack that any further. It just shows how long we worked together. Yeah, I guess I would say that's fair, and it's fair to want to sort of bridge it a little bit more and more as we move forward, so that it doesn't feel so jarring at the time. Although I'm going to also surface that as a criticism I have for this episode as compared to the previous ones, which is this. First of all, just highlighting what I was saying is like, in the 90s, Roseanne and Married with Children far more comedically and sardonically than Roseanne, we're pointedly talking about the failure of sitcoms historically to capture the reality of the American family. And so Roseanne situated that sitcom format in the middle of a very blue collar family, which she felt represented her own life and the lives of many people that we didn't see on television. Married with Children basically just took it all the way to sardonic and
what if they were awful to each other?
What if they were just horrible, horrible people?
Right.
And it was, I gotta say, that was my jam. Married with Children was 100% my jam, but I'm also a Sunny lover, so apparently I love horrible people. But what this did, to your point, is bring it further. It allowed us to get a little bit more in the heads of the kids, because there's the ability to talk directly to camera and sort of narrate what's happening for them emotionally. But it also does sort of bridge the gap a little faster to the completion of this series. What I didn't love as much, there were a couple of moments where I thought the dissonance between the Wanda's created reality and what people were really experiencing was very well done, and very eerie. So when you saw the first woman who looked like a Halloween animatronic, and she has one single tear, that was very powerfully done. Or we saw, like, when they get to the edges of town, it's almost like the background extras, the background extras, where you're not as concerned about them. So Wanda really hasn't even given them a story or a life, and they're just frozen in time, which is so cruel. So I thought those were really well done. But outside of that, when it was, Vision breaking the reality with her, or even Pietro breaking the reality and saying, how, like, tell me how you did it and things like that. What I would have liked to see more is what we saw early on, which is like through sound, through visual cues, through score, really highlighting the dissonance. And I would like to see her trying to hold on to the false reality a little bit more in those moments. I would love to see more of like the tension between the reality she's trying to hold on to and people trying to break through it a little more than what we're currently seeing, which is like, he's just talking to her and it's very easy. Do you understand what I'm saying about that stylistically?
Yeah, I get it. How like they could have done a little more to interweave that, maybe.
Yeah, it just like was more delicately done, and I think as a result more eerie in the initial episodes. And also, like, clearly she doesn't know how this started, which brings us back to our original thought that, like, she is perhaps not the one who started it. But want your take on that?
Yeah, that was interesting. We're getting a lot more of these little pieces here about, like, basically she tells Pietro that the last thing she remembers is kind of all-encompassing grief and emptiness.
Yeah.
And that, again, this leans into the, like, who's behind this is, the going into the comic books of it all. Is it something Mephisto or something like Mephisto? Because it is a sort of deal with the devil, sort of like she felt this great grief, emptiness, loss, and then suddenly she got everything.
Yeah.
It's there, but of course these poor people are sort of just trapped as these puppets in it. And then again, it's like she's letting it happen. It's interesting because Pietro gives her kind of like he tells her that it's okay, that it's like, he and of course, like, there's all the questions about who is this Pietro really, because projected onto him is that it's her brother, right? Like, he talks about being shot, but it's not him, and she even acknowledges it, like, why do you look different? But she doesn't. It's like kind of the whole thing in the show is she doesn't really want to deal with her problems all the way, or kind of go all the way with it. So she's willing to let this sort of facade go, with what's going on. But I was also, it's a little contradictory, and I'm hopefully there'll be an answer for it, which is like last week she was very directly talking about, I'm not controlling all these people. Do you think I could make them like go to the dentist or whatever her example was, But in this episode, we see that it's like the further they get from her and the center of town, they kind of, like you said, kind of shut down almost. It's like they're not, which makes it seem like she is controlling them, but maybe again, it's not even a conscious thing. It's just like she is the center of this power, but there seems that there's something else, right? Like something else caused this is the underlying thing here.
Yeah, I think it was notable, and I think we should pay attention to the fact that Pietro was giving her permission. But like that was what I would call the, like, I'm not even mad, I'm just impressed moment, where it's like she's not a cruel person, you know? And so somewhere in the back of her consciousness is tugging, feeling guilty for what she's doing, because what she's doing is very cruel.
Yes.
And what's happening to them is very cruel, and that's becoming more and more clear. And so just to underscore what I was saying, like my boyfriend is a practical effects makeup artist, and so does work on shows like The Walking Dead. And the makeups are far more elaborate and detailed the further up the person is, the extra is. And then when you get all the way back, it's like these blank, you know, it's very undetailed because they're not going to be seen so much on camera. Zombies. So similarly here, she's not giving them storylines if she's not dealing with them, right? Which they're just sitting there frozen in time, unable to move. I mean, it's like incredibly cruel.
Yeah.
And Vision clearly wants to break through that and wants to help them, wants to help Agnes, who we should talk about that too. But there's some part of Wanda that is also reconciling herself with that. And here comes this character that just as like Vision's able to break through and try to get through to her, trying to get through to the part of her that has a conscience. Here comes this character in the form of her brother, but not really exactly right, who's giving her permission to keep going, right? And she doesn't know where it started. Like, to me, it's very clear. And also the fact that the kids are constantly called demon children, like it feels like a deal with the devil.
Yeah, yeah.
That she no longer has. And what does he want? Like, I maintain this whole thing is about them, those kids. And that is such a story of Mephistopheles, you know, like I'm there to collect a child, you know, in order to what? Yeah.
It's interesting because they're going to have to work with a lot.
So I know is the character I'm saying. Like,
right. We only have 3 episodes left after this. And I am curious how they'll do this ending, because whatever the other thing is, whether the presence, this being, if it's Mephisto, they have to reveal it sooner than later, I feel, because, you know, people who know comics know Mephisto or know these storylines, but most of the MCU fans have not read those comics. And there would be something probably pretty dramatically unsatisfying if Mephisto shows up at the penultimate, it's the cliffhanger of the second to last episode. I'm behind this all. And everyone's like, who's that? And then the final episode, he's like, here's who I am. Here's my deal. Here's why I care about you, Wanda. That's like a lot of heavy lifting for the show to have to do. And that could, you know, kind of really take away kind of the emotional core of it. So I'm really interested to see how they thread that needle, you know, because to me, the closer we get to the end and we don't see a Mephisto or something like that, I'm feeling it's like, oh, maybe it's not him, or maybe it's more of how they revealed Thanos, which was a post-credit scene of Avengers saying, oh, this was the guy behind all this. We'll deal with him later. You know, we've told our story with a satisfying conclusion, but it's the MCU, we're going to continue. So guess what? There's this other figure that can be important in the Doctor Strange sequel. Closer we get to the end and we don't meet Mephisto or something like him, the more I think that might be what they do.
Oh, sorry. But it's clear that she's a participant in it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like a deal with the devil, you know what I mean? Like, sure, and one that she likely doesn't even remember, you know, where it's like, okay, I'll give you Vision back and you can have a really happy life, and live and you can control your own reality. Nothing can hurt you this way. But I'm going to take your kids and a theoretical child against what she described she was feeling, like an ocean of torment. Sure, you know, maybe. But clearly her power has grown exponentially. Look what she just did.
Yeah.
You know? And so that to me speaks to some kind of battle down the line, because she's not at this point going to be willing to give up her children.
Right.
Now that they're real, and now that she sees them, and now that she has whatever feeling she has them. But Pietro, her brother, I mean, I don't think it's, we've talked about this, I don't think it's impossible that he is the villain, you know? And he's come to kind of like he even says like, oh, he starts naming the television tropes about why he's there.
Yeah.
And I'm the uncle, I'm coming to shake stuff up. But he's spending so much time with the kids. And he's also the one that is there to help unleash their powers, you know? So like I just keep returning to that because I feel like that's going to play out. Also, the Yo Magic ad, which was so
Whoa,
creepy.
that was so creepy.
I mean, there's like something very real in that. Like, I ate your magic. And so, as these kids' powers are growing, something wants them, and it's not going to go very well for whatever entity, whether it's Wanda or the kids or whoever, if their magic gets eaten. This is what happens.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It was that you can read a lot into that ad because so far the ads have been so tied to like the traumas that she went through. And so there was, I'm trying to remember the exact tagline of the ad. It said something about like for survivors or something like that.
Survivors.
A snack for survivors. So there did seem to also be the implication if it's reflecting her, it's like, well, she's the survivor. She survived with her magic. Everyone around her she loved died. Yeah. But she was able to go on.
But the kid wasn't able. It was like, here's your magic, but you're not able to get to it.
Yeah, so
that was literally right there. But you're gonna starve to death and die because you just can't open this lid.
That was grim.
So grim, but awesome. Like that's the kind of stuff that I love in the episode. Where I think they handle that dissonance really well, and it's really creepy. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have to mention the Halloween. Oh, I did also like the what happened to your ex and what happened to yours, and she's like, I don't know.
Right.
I wasn't very good at it. She really wasn't very good at it. She's a great actress, but God, that was not her strength. We have to mention that, and of course the costumes, which were very fun.
Yeah, they did, these huge direct nods to the comics with the two of them and Pietro and Billy wearing like his Wiccan type outfit. Tommy not as much, although Tommy's speed costume in the comics already evokes Quicksilver, so by having him just mirror a mini Quicksilver costume, it did the same thing. So these very direct nods and setups to things we know from their future. I will note that it's worth noting that the closing credits of each episode in that sort of digital imagery is the Scarlet Witch's headdress, which this is the first time we've seen a version of it. I'm guessing we will get her in a more cool version in Doctor Strange, or maybe even the end of this show, because it seems like they're establishing like that's part of her look. And Kevin Feige was so kept saying this is the show where she'll become the Scarlet Witch. Yeah. So I think we will see another version of that that headgear, but it was very, fun to get it in the way they did. And notably her costume was like the least cheesy. Yeah. And then, she gets to like be so powerful at the end and make the towns, grow wearing that costume. And it's like, oh yeah, more and more. It's like, this is the comic book Scarlet Witch, coming in.
Which is really fun and very earned. And here's what I want, even though I was bringing up those little things that I would have enjoyed more just as a viewer, it's like more my aesthetic. Like I'm still loving this show. Like it is 100% my cup of tea and really fun to watch. I want to talk about two things because we had talked about Agnes previously, and now it feels like, no, she really is one of the victims. Unless she's incredibly deceptive and was doing that just to mess with Vision somehow, but why? Thoughts?
It's interesting. First of all, it's like they have to have known that the comic book fans were going to guess she might be Agatha Harkness from the get-go. Quick comics backstory: Agatha Harkness is a elderly witch who mentored Wanda in the comic books. Not usually a villain, though sometimes it was kind of those like maybe doing nefarious things because she thought it was better for Wanda type character. But so people already thought that. Then in this episode, she is dressed as a witch with gray hair. They know it's like going to feed into that. And maybe it still could be that. It's just the question is she behind this, controlling it, or is she just more knowledgeable because she has more going on, that she is also some sort of magical entity? Or is it none of that? Is she just a woman who lived in this neighborhood? And it was funny that by doing that scene where she both seems completely out of sorts and sad and lost, but also huge nods to the Agatha Harkness character, I think they're having fun knowing that we're going to be theorizing,
Yeah, like just messing with everybody's heads a little bit. But this is the other thing is like very notably in the episode, DNA is changing. Yes. And so what does that mean? And like, could it be that maybe she was just this lady that lived in the neighborhood, but because maybe the closer you are to Wanda in the storyline, the more your DNA changes. I don't know. That's a guess. So perhaps like she wasn't that person, but soon she will be. How they're changing, what it means, like if this is a way that they're introducing the idea of mutants, if it's like they're introducing mutants this way plus multiverses, I don't know. That seems a little convoluted and unclean to me. It's like very unmarvel like, you know. So some people have been guessing that this is like how they're going to introduce the idea of mutants, but to me it's like, well, or she just pulls them in from a different dimension, you know.
I mean, we already knew, like, okay, like Monica Rambeau has to get her powers eventually, and they very directly were like, you're changing, and you went through the barrier twice, in and out, and that's messed with you even more. So that's notable for Monica. But then at the end of the episode, because we don't know if everyone inside that bubble would be changed, or maybe they're not because the bubble was built around them. But at the end of the episode, all those sword agents and Darcy are kind of absorbed by the hex. So you'd think that they might all get powers on some level, maybe, if based on what Darcy was saying.
Yeah. The other thing too is that I still have a question about is Vision real? Because it felt to me like what I was expecting to see when he passed through the barrier was that he would be dead again, and he would just like whatever was animating him would go immediately away, and he'd be a corpse on the floor. But that's not what happened. It was like he was being torn apart. So part of me felt like he is just a construct of the hex. Like that he isn't a walking around animated body, but that he's a construct that outside of it will completely disassemble. That's what it looks like to me, but I don't know if you had a different take.
Yeah, as we theorized, I mean, it's, I think a pretty easy theory based on what she said a couple episodes. It's like, he can't survive outside it. Like when she's like, we can't leave, and she was so sad. It's like, it felt like he can't survive outside it. What he literally is, though, is interesting because we know she stole his corpse, and she saw that vision, no pun intended, of him has like the dead Vision from Infinity War, gray with the stone pulled out. But like you said, when he went through, it's not like he turned back into that. So it does, is it that his body is somewhere in the center of town and this is a projection, or is it just she's managed to rebuild him in this manner, but only inside the hex? I will say it's also interesting because she saw dead Pietro in this episode too.
Exactly, and that's not him.
That's not even the same guy.
The same guy, so it doesn't. So we should.
I think that's just her. Like the commercials, it's like her. She's trying to push away all her trauma. Which there was actually a very pointed line, right, about how when she said to Pietro she remembered something from their past differently, and he said, you probably suppressed a lot of trauma. Which is very literally what she's done. So the commercials and the times when she sees these loved ones dead are when I don't think it's literally happening or literally what they look like. It's certainly not for Pietro. It's just when the facade's coming down for her, and it's like what she doesn't want to face, the truth she doesn't want to face. That's how they're coming in.
Totally, which is, hey, Ryan, heads up, I'm going to go to you shortly to hear from everybody. We want to hear your theories, if you're still loving it, if what television show you would like to be dropped into, because I do think it's a very interesting, like, exploration of somebody's psyche. Coming back to this, though, I mean, listen, this has always been a really great metaphor for trauma, and for grief, because the things that we don't want to think about in our lives, they do have a way of coming back to our minds, and sometimes quite suddenly and sometimes quite painfully, and very viscerally frequently. And like, if that was, obviously if you were literally seeing that would be highly problematic. But that's the way her power works. But it becomes more and more clear how muddy it is, like how much she doesn't even know how much she is and is not controlling, because she's sitting there so befuddled that Vision is going to do a thing that she had not ordained for this episode.
Right, that wasn't what her plan was.
That wasn't the plan for this episode. She had wanted to have a very special Halloween episode, and this is not the way that it's going. Already her brother showed up and she said, I didn't do that, and I don't know how we got here. So like 100%, she didn't just create this full whole hog, right? But something has unleashed, and something we don't understand yet what it is. So Ryan, go ahead and go to the comments. Let us know what they're thinking. And then Eric, you'll tell us what television show you would like to be dropped into.
I will tell you that in 1 second. The only other thing I want to say about Pietro is, I'm just so curious. This episode was interesting because it left everything still on the table as far as the theories we talked about. Agnes, it's like, is it closing it off or is it not? And with Pietro, they're like, is this the guy from the X-Men movies or not? I think that's everything still on the table because no matter what, he thinks or kind of has the feelings of the previous Pietro, but it seems so. It's like, is this a real guy? Whether some dude in the MCU or whether the guy we met in the X movies who's been imprinted with Pietro, or is it the villain behind it all, you know?
Yeah, and to me right now, it feels like either thing is possible because, listen, for the rest of them too, they're also not aware. I mean, they're feeling when they're in there, we know this from Monica, that when you're in there, you're feeling that you are this character, and then you might have these moments of awareness that you're something else, you know. But it wasn't like she went in there and she was like, well, I'm Agent Monica. She didn't know.
Right.
But the only quibble that I would have with that is that Peter is super powered.
That's my thing. He's to me, it's almost definitely the guy from the X-Men movies if he's a real person at all. You know, I think
if he's a real person, then I hope that's who it is. But it's also, and maybe it's why he has a little more awareness, but not full awareness enough to be like, I know that you're doing this, and I'm just curious how, and all of those other things. Or he's actually the one controlling everything, and he's manipulating her. But if he's manipulating her, it's a weird thing to take her down the track of understanding that she doesn't know exactly what's going down. You know what I mean? Like you would want to reinforce this idea, her own illusion within the illusion.
So TV show. I was just gonna say, do you want us to say any TV show ever we want to go into, or like kind of the ones they've been homaging on?
No, any TV show ever that you would want to go into, because I think it is this really interesting thing. Like, obviously, this is a deconstruction of sitcom history and like wanting to live in an otherworldly, lovely reality, which is probably another reason to skip the '90s shows that broke that. Yeah, one of the things that I actually reflected on this morning is I just like pulled up a GIF and it happened to be the Bewitched one.
Right.
And I was like, it's so funny when I think about those shows, like it seemed so fun when I would, Kevin, when I would watch it on Nick at Night or whatever, like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. But in reflection now, I'm like, those were shows about extremely powerful women who were either trapped in a bottle or had to suppress their power and vacuum as not to irritate their husband. So I was like, that sounds horrible, actually. Not fun at all to live in. That sounds really not fun. I want to be in the show where I could express my power. So like The Magicians, or there's a lot of trauma in The Magicians, though.
There is.
I might just be in this show. What do you think?
I'd say of the shows that they've done references to, I was saying Brady Bunch earlier because there's something strangely inviting to me about how openly artificial the Brady Bunch was, which WandaVision evoked with like that AstroTurf backyard. Like it like they weren't even trying, because they could have done better in the 70s, but they were like, nah, it's just gonna look super fake. There's something about that is actually strangely appealing to me, and how upbeat it all is. If you're saying any show ever, I don't know, like ultimately, because I could pick like cool but like dangerous and dark shows like Lost, but I'm like, then I might die. And there's monsters and stuff, but I'd say, man, like maybe something like Parks and Rec, where it's just like really fun and really nice sweet people, It's like,
because it's like, totally, because the shows that I love are not necessarily the ones I would want to be in. Like, I love It's Always Sunny, but would I actually want to hang out with those people? No way, but so that's why I think like I would want to be in a show where I got to use magic, know. But to your point, those shows that are high fantasy and things like that, also you could be dead within an instant.
Right. And then I was thinking recent shows. I'm like, oh man, I love Ted Lasso, but I know nothing about sports. So I guess I could just be like someone who hangs out though, like, just on the sidelines there, because Ted's so nice.
Be best friends with Keely.
Right. Yeah. Just hang with Keely. So.
Like just be an Instagram friend. I don't think I'm an Instagram person, but maybe a friend of an Instagrammer.
Friend of an influencer.
I'm a friend. I know a lot of influencers. No, I still want to do magic. So I'll do that show. Ryan, what do you got?
Hey,
Hey.
A lot of stuff going around in chat, so sorry if I can't get to all of it, people in chat. Thank you for talking about it. There's been some quibbling with your guys' assertion that they skipped the 90s fully. I mean, clearly the main thing that they are parroting is Malcolm in the Middle, kind of. And that's January 6th, 2000 is the first episode.
It was filming in the 90s.
So I definitely agree with Roth, and I'll get to the comments, but I definitely agree with Roth that they skipped the early 90s and mid 90s and kind of did like late 90s, early 2000s blend. Devil Kazuya 27 says, seriously, the shark commercial was the most 90s thing I've seen in a while.
That's true.
Yeah. And then staying on the shark commercial at Mezazra, everyone glossing over the shark saying he's going to feed on your magic and the kid slowly dying. Something in the heck is eating Wanda and her magic. So I think that's what Roth is saying.
Come on. I said exactly that.
But it means the kid too, because it was a child doing it. So is it Wanda or are they feeding on the kids? I think either way, Roth did mention that. Let's see. Didn't touch Hayward that much. There was a good amount of Hayward stuff. Timothy Reynolds says Hayward's objective is vision. And Langley Neely says, I'm just curious about Hayward turning evil so fast. Someone using him.
I feel like Hayward is going to be what he seems to be on the surface more likely than like I'm really a supervillain. Like I think it's like he's that jerk. He's Paul Gleason in Die Hard. He's the like I'm going to do it my way because I think it's right and our heroes have to like go around his back, and he's a dick. It's like I feel like it might be too obvious for him to be like I'm actually secretly working for this supervillain. I think.
What do you think he knows that Darcy was onto?
Well, it just seemed like he had more intel, and it was interesting. They felt like it was a big deal that he was tracking Vision, and so. But then again, Vision was stolen from Sword, so it's like it almost felt like Sword had plans for Vision, even though he said he didn't want to be turned into a weapon after he died. Sword probably wanted to do something with his tech, something with his components. So it feels like they might just want him back. Like that might be a priority for them because he was actually stolen from them. And we don't know what exactly they were doing with his body and why they had torn it all apart. So I feel like, there might be some, secret weapon or something that like seems kind of nefarious or something that's not on the on the up and up that maybe he's involved with more than him being like either behind it all or like working for a supervillain. I think that there might be, again though, I keep wondering if like the Sword stuff can be backdoor info for Secret Invasion. It feels like that's the way the MCU intersects more and more. I feel like not that this is direct plotline stuff, but that there's certainly ways it can thread into that, with the things that we're getting here.
I'll be a little disappointed if I've brought up the Tony Stark tech a couple of times, and I'll be disappointed if that never plays out in the end. Because like, if there's any moment that is applicable, it's here. She's literally reconciling with grief and these emotions and these hard to deal with emotions by going into a fake created world. Now turning human beings into meat puppets, not what Tony had in mind. He was like, I was looking more for like a VR experience.
Right, like some holograms, man.
We're just talking holograms, not but yeah, I'll be disappointed if that never plays in somehow, because then why did you introduce it in the first place? Like, why was that even brought up?
I mean,
not that there aren't threads that get dropped. There are, but that's a pretty interesting thread.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like in the moment that was there, A, to give us young Robert Downey Jr., but B, to just so directly, connect us to the Winter Soldier backstory with Tony. So it could come up, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it will. I also want to say, though, Ryan, I totally agree that while they did, quote unquote, skip the 90s, it's very true that, yeah, Malcolm in the Middle still is a product of the 90s. It debuted right at the beginning of 2000. And also, I've always argued that I really like Malcolm in the Middle, but it owes a great debt, has the scrubs, to the Adventures of Pete and Pete, as far as stylistically. And that
Clarissa Explains It All also got a shout out in the chat as like another one of like
those Nickelodeon shows actually were kind of ahead of the curve on that sort of single camera, quirky, highly stylized thing. So there's a lot of DNA of those 90s shows in Malcolm. So I would say that this represents that as well.
There are, but it's definitely not like it skipped a generation of the evolution television is what I would say. Because like by the time you got to Malcolm, it was more, and those single camera shows, it was like the hybrid of like, okay, we're gonna show a little bit of more of like the rough around the edges parts of family life, but it'll be quirky and sweet. You know, it's not gonna be like real, you know, which I think like Roseanne and Married with Children, again, we're kind of like breaking through and just being like, guys, the Brady Bunch is bullshit. And what if people were horrible? They are, and it's funny. Here's Peg. That it's like it's skipping a. I think it's an incomplete historical document.
I don't know if they ever said they were giving a historical document, but
I do. As you guys were talking about the text, Mr. Mingo did say, "What does it mean? The hex wall is now red. At the beginning, it was blue." That also was, you know, is it just she's taking more general control of it in that instant? You guys think, because it was kind of red before the end when she did the thing too.
Yeah, I think that might just more be a visually direct way to show her power growing, and the whole Scarlet Witch of it all, which has this show made sure to remind us was a name that had never been used before in the MCU. So even though her powers always had that red, you know, mystical thing, as Pietro joked about, I think just having the barrier turn more and more red is just like her heightened. I think it's just a visual way to represent, you know, her growing power.
You know, another option too, Eric, and bringing it, like, not to make too much of Yo Magic, which is a yogurt I would definitely eat, is the idea that like fattening up, the, like Hansel and Gretel, speaking of witches style, fattening up before you consume, almost like someone trying to encourage her magic and or the kids' magic to grow so that by the time it is consumed, it's very potent. Because, you know, she's doing things, and it was pointed out in this episode that she was not previously able to do. Like, you have really stepped up your game here. You know, before you were just doing like boogity boogity with your hands. But like now you're, this stuff's crazy.
now it's gone pretty crazy. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I wanted to mention something I very much appreciated with my girl Darcy, which is that the MCU has a now very funny tradition of how can we say the F word without saying it. And Ant-Man, Spider-Man say it, and they're cut off, like it like cuts to the credits. And Nick Fury tries to say it, and he's snapped. He's disintegrated. And Darcy was a very funny way to do it because she got put into the bubble. So it's like she was gonna say the real word, but it turned into fudge because it hit her right then.
Yeah.
So that was a fun way to continue this kind of through line until Deadpool will actually just say the word one day.
Or like 10 times.
10 times.
On the Darcy note, Unheard Stingray says, "What will Darcy's role be in the town now?" Or just where do you think they're going with that?
I'm very excited by this, by the way. I felt like they had to put Kat Dennings into, even though it seems like it's going to happen. My presumption is next episode is the last one that's going to be has much sitcom. We assume it'll be the Modern Family one we've seen some clips from. Mm-hmm. And then it sounds like the final two will probably be like all hell breaks loose. But yeah, I don't know. Do they go meta? And, you know, a lot of people joked, you know, I've already done the like picture of her in a waitress outfit because of Two Broke Girls, which was a different kind of sitcom, but I don't know. Darcy, you know, would fit well into a lot of different TV comedies, but what would her Westview role be? I'm trying to think of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. She was brought into the carnival-like experience with the rest of them, it looked like. So yeah, I hope it's not too much playing on Two Broke Girls, because I do think that that's like that starts to throw me off when you're really referencing like the person's real life, the actors real. Yeah.
I forgot to mention though, they did that. This episode was interesting because they did the most direct meta joke I've ever seen in an MCU thing, which was the repeating of Kick-Ass. When Pietro said Kick-Ass and then Wanda said Kick-Ass, which was, you know, obviously a joke on the fact that both Quicksilvers, I meant to send you a picture, William, and I forgot to have, of the fact that Aaron Taylor Johnson and Evan Peters were both in the first Kick-Ass movie together. Yeah. And it was this weird thing that they both became Quicksilver after that. So that was a unusual moment of them doing a little nod to someone's like non-MCU history there with that repeated line. I liked it. I thought it was funny, but you can't do that too much. It becomes a little weird if you're constantly referencing like I was in this other thing, you know, I did this other role, you know me for. I mean, even Samuel L. Jackson getting cut off saying the F word was a little bit of a meta joke on Samuel L. Jackson says the F word, you know.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, like, I do think that there's a fine line between subtle, like, small references and or meta jokes about Marvel versus meta jokes about Elizabeth Olsen's IMDb. You know what I mean? Like, that's where I feel like for me, I would start to get thrown out of the created reality. But we're going to get thrown back into the created reality next week for more Witch Business on WandaVision. And by that time, we will have thought of the perfect show in which to immerse ourselves in, where we can use magic and it's really fun and very enjoyable and everyone's really nice. And yet it is not dangerous at all.
The threat of death is not coming around the corner every moment.
Maybe like the first Sabrina.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Because the second one's dark. Did you see this last season?
I didn't see the last season, but I've seen the show.
Whoa! It's dark. It is dark. That's a different episode. All right. More Witch Business coming at you. Magic. That was my... Anyway, that's it. Bye, William. We should...